But I will say good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Wednesday night AJA live Zoom series. We have a very special live and exclusive guest tonight. But before I get to that, there's something that I have to say, and that is thank you. On Sunday, we had our charity day, and I want to say thank you to every single person who answered the phone, who supported us, who donated the smallest, the biggest, the matches. We had an incredible day. Our target was $200,000, and by 6 p.m., we had smashed that target. I can happily say that we have raised over $250,000 to our AJ Tzedakah, and we could not have done it without the support of all of you, our matches, our donors, our volunteers, our committee members. We had over 20 volunteers across the country who've spent the entire day calling people, texting, phoning, working hard to get that matching money in. And that really supports us. We need that money and we need that support to fight the rising anti-Semitism in Australia. And thanks to you, we have managed to make a big dent that can help us operate and fight anti-Semitism for the next year. So from all of us at AJA and HAT, we just want to say a big thank you. Now, for our live and exclusive guest, and I can definitely say exclusive because he is not an easy man to pin down for a live chat, we have tonight Hillel Neuer. He is the executive director of UN Watch, and our topic tonight will be the toxic role of UNRWA and UNIFIL. Hillel Neuer has been the leading voice exposing the corruption and terrorism links of the UN agencies in the Middle East. Without further ado, please welcome Hillel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to make sure everyone can see me and hear me.
Yeah, all good. All good.
Good. Okay. Great to be with you. And Australia has been and is one of my favorite countries. I had the privilege to be there twice. The last time was right before COVID, speaking in Melbourne and Sydney. And normally I don't take holiday, but my mom made me promise, because the first time I went about a little over 10 years ago, I went to Melbourne and I didn't see anything because I was working nonstop and doing lectures and whatnot. And then also I had work to do back at my office in Geneva. So I was sort of, the candle was being burnt on both ends. I was in Sydney. I didn't even see the opera building. So that was the first time. And my mom was horrified when she heard that happened. She made me promise after that trip that the next time I went on a long journey, I would at least take some holiday. And so the second time I went, which was in February 2020, I made a point of it. I took off a few days and I went up to Cairns, to Port Douglas, and I saw the Great Barrier Reef, and it was magnificent. And I also went around a little bit in Sydney, and I got to see the Australian Men's Tennis Open final with Joko in February 2020. Those are my last memories of visiting Australia, and hopefully I can come back another time in person soon. Of course, it's far away, so I'm happy to do this video call and share with you some thoughts about what the world's leading international body has been doing in response to some of the worst atrocities we've seen in modern times. So as you do know, the United Nations recently marked its 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in December 1948. And that document in 1948, just a few years after the Holocaust, in the preamble, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights speaks about being adopted in response to barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. Barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. And the United Nations was really founded to respond to those kinds of barbarous acts. That was the underlying premise of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you fast forward from 1948 to October 7th, 2023, we witnessed truly barbarous acts. President Biden had said there are times when pure, unadulterated evil are unleashed upon the world. And that was what we saw on October 7th. Likewise, Rishi Sunak, the then Prime Minister of the UK, spoke of the pogrom that had taken place on that day. So world leaders recognized the horrific atrocities of that day. And we expected the United Nations to lead the world in responding to those atrocities, the barbarous acts which outrage the conscience of mankind. But tragically, as I'm sure everyone that I'm looking at on this call knows, the UN has basically done the complete opposite. Rather than represent morality and represent the conscience of mankind, the UN, on numerous occasions, with very few exceptions, has effectively legitimized the terrorists of Hamas, has effectively incentivized Hamas, because Hamas gets the message that if they commit terrorist acts, the UN and its various bodies, its various officials, will reward them by denouncing the Jewish state, condemning the Jewish state, putting on inquiries in international courts and embargoes, and basically trying to delegitimize their enemy. So the UN has been incentivized. And most famously, I'm going to give you just a few examples today. I'm going to talk about Secretary General Guterres from the top. Some of his officials, like the notorious Francesca Albanese. Sadly, many people on this call will know her because she visited Australia a year ago this month. I'll mention a few words about UNIFIL, which is very timely given the ceasefire that was announced between Israel and Lebanon. That's the UN force in Lebanon. And finally, UNRWA, maybe one of the most important factors in this whole conflict that for many years we haven't paid attention to. So starting with Guterres, as you know, a few weeks after the massacre, Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, said, "I condemn Hamas," but at the same time he said, but it must be said, those attacks did not happen in a vacuum. The Hamas acts did not happen in a vacuum. And he went on to enumerate numerous alleged Palestinian grievances over the years, one after the other after the other. Effectively, the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, was legitimizing what Hamas did. A few days afterwards, he said, no, I didn't legitimize, but he did legitimize. Those attacks did not happen in a vacuum. Now, part of what he said is true. Part of what he said is true. Those attacks did not happen in a vacuum. Guess what, friends? Nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing you did today, nothing we've ever done, no action takes place in a vacuum. The Hamas terrorists, the thousands of Hamas Nukba terrorists, the thousands of Gaza civilians who joined them, who committed the most horrific atrocities, didn't happen in a vacuum. One question, if Mr. Guterres had an ounce of self-reflection, the question he might have asked is, didn't happen in a vacuum. What schools did they go to? Who taught them? And had he asked that question, the answer that he'd have to face would be looking in the mirror. 90%, according to the former UNRWA legal officer, 90% of Gazans, 90% of the Hamas terrorists went to UNRWA schools, right? Do you remember when Lahavdil, to give another example, but when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, right? And it emerged that the killer had gone to Bar Ilan University, right? There was like tearing of clothes. Like, how could a graduate of our university have done this? Where did we go wrong? The whole religious Zionist education system was called out and said, what did you do? And people asked, what did we do wrong? It was squarely put for months, if not years, in the media. Where did we go wrong? How did this happen? But the fact that thousands of terrorists were graduates of UNRWA schools, and the fact that UNRWA, basically turns a blind eye to that, the UN never spoke about that once, never said we're ashamed that these people went to UNRWA schools, let alone the fact, and we'll come to it in a moment, that UNRWA employees and officials actually took part in the massacre. Active, not just graduates, but active employees, including a social worker, took part in the massacre. None of that was ever addressed by Guterres. Okay, so that was the message by Guterres. These acts did not happen in a vacuum. Israel committed oppression of over decades of the Palestinians, and they didn't really have a choice, right? That's the theme. So that was the tone set back in late October by Guterres, and that trickled down throughout the UN. So we could look at many examples. We could look at the head of the World Health Organization repeatedly denouncing Israel for violating the neutrality of hospitals, without saying that if Israel goes into a hospital in Gaza, it's because Hamas terrorists have turned it into one of their headquarters. Like Shifa Hospital, infamously, is where they would put many of their operations headquarters, where they dragged the hostages. You could see it on video, closed circuit video. And, you have the head of the WHO condemning Israel for going in when they're going out to root out terrorists who violated the Geneva Conventions. None of that is ever mentioned by the WHO. And this is, of course, as you know, an array of UN bodies. And I'll just mention one of them, which is the Human Rights Council, based in Geneva. That's our headquarters. And we specialize in that nefarious Orwellian named body. It's not really a human rights council. It's maybe a human wrongs council. The Human Rights Council, more than any other body in the world, has legitimized and incentivized Hamas terrorism every time they attacked Israel. When Israel responded, starting back in Operation Cast-Lead 2008, 2009, emergency session to condemn Israel, created inquiry. That was the infamous Goldstone report, which initiated the whole notion that Israel should be dragged before the international courts for war crimes. And again over the years, all of these inquisitions, most infamously a couple of years ago in 2021, after the war of May 2021, a few days later, the UN condemned Israel, created a permanent inquiry, right? The Goldstone Commission was several months back in 2009. They issued their ignominious report accusing Israel of deliberately targeting civilians, even though Goldstone himself, about a year later, renounced that declaration. But the damage was done. And that lasted about a year, more or less. But in 2021, they named a permanent, perpetual, endless commission of inquiry headed by Navi Pillay, an infamous Israel hater who said Israel's an apartheid state. So completely prejudicial. She had made her verdicts up in advance. So she heads the permanent commission of inquiry. It includes an Australian named Chris Sidoti. I know him because he used to be in my building in Geneva working for a so-called human rights group. And he said, oh, Jews throw around accusations of anti-Semitism like rice at a wedding. Like rice at a wedding, they throw out accusations of anti-Semitism. And the other member of the inquiry is Milun Kotari, who a couple of years ago in an interview said that the Jews control social media, for which he was condemned by about 18 different countries, including countries that are not pro-Israel at all, like Belgium and many others. 18 democracies condemned him for anti-Semitism. So that's the permanent commission of inquiry. And finally, the Human Rights Council. There are many examples, but I'm just giving a handful. And finally, for today, the example is, of course, Francesca Albanese. Many of you, again, know her. A year ago, she came to Australia. She's the UN expert on Palestine. It's called the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine. The mandate itself is biased. The mandate is not to investigate human rights. Her title is Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Occupied Palestinian Territories. So when you hear it, you say, okay, human rights in a territory sounds good. We all want human rights. If she's examining human rights violations or actions in a territory, if the jihad does something, if Hamas does something, but actually the mandate, unchanged since February 1993, it calls on the rapporteur to investigate, and I quote, Israel's violations of the bases and principles of international law since 1967. Israel only is examined, only, and their actions are presumed violations. So if Hamas, the jihad, Fatah, all the other terrorist groups in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, if they do something not in her mandate to investigate Israel's violations. Again, the only mandate, there are, I think, 15 country mandates of the Human Rights Council. Only one presumes the actions to be violations. So that's her mandate. And the person they picked sadly fits the mandate. Francesca Albanese is an Italian-born jurist. She used to work for UNRWA, surprise, surprise, for a few years. And she hates Israel. She doesn't just hate Israel, but she has very interesting things to say about Jews. About 10 years ago, she wrote a fundraising appeal for UNRWA. She actually wrote it to her town in Italy, to her priest in Italy, Mr. Don Antonio. Antonio Blundo is his name. And she wrote him and she said, Don Antonio, this is in summer of 2014, Israel is killing Palestinians. And you know, America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. She said this in a public Facebook post. It was a letter that she posted on the internet. So it's not even like contemporary anti-Semitism where you demonize Israel as the Jew among the nations. which is obvious enough because Jews are being attacked around the world in the name of anti-Zionism, in the name of anti-Israel protests. Jews are being beaten up and hunted, whether it's in Amsterdam, whether it's my hometown, Montreal, horrific scenes. Someone said Montreal looks like Malmo, if you know the town in Sweden, not far from Copenhagen, which has turned into a no-go zone for Jews because there are Muslim mobs that maraud in the areas. And Montreal, the streets of Montreal looked the same. If you saw, they were smashing windows. There was a graduate of Concordia University. Shamefully, that's the school that I attended. So very tragic to see that. A graduate from that school last week had her hand up in a Nazi salute, and she was saying, the final solution is coming. Do you know what the final solution is? This is openly on the streets of Montreal in front of the school that I attended for 4 years, the university. Just shameful. So that's what's been going on in the name of anti-Israelism, but just old school classical anti-Semitism, textbook anti-Semitism. Albanese says the Jews control the Jewish lobby. Since she was appointed in May 1, 2022, she immediately went to a Hamas conference and she said, you have the right to resist. I'm going to say that again. She went to a Hamas conference in November 2022. We have the video, and she said, you have the right to resist. She egged them on. Imagine you're a Palestinian in Gaza. You belong to Hamas, and you're watching a UN human rights expert, the official UN expert on Palestine, from Geneva or wherever it is, telling you, you have the right to resist. Well, if I were the heads of Hamas, I would say, the world is with us. The world is with us. And sadly, too often, it seems like they are given that impression. So that's Francesca Albanese. I could go on with dozens of examples where she accused the media, I think the BBC, of saying you have the Israel lobby is like in your blood system. She accused Israel of greed, a lot of anti-Semitic tropes. She routinely compares Israel to the Third Reich, to the Nazis. This has happened on numerous occasions before she was appointed, after she was appointed. You may have seen she was just on Piers Morgan the other day, and she said, oh, no, I never compared Israelis to Nazis. Go on the internet, go on her Facebook page or Twitter account, rather, and you'll see numerous examples for which, and I want to say our group, UN Watch, is leading the fight against this, perhaps the most prominent anti-Semite in the world. We're leading the fight against her. We got her condemned by France, Germany, the United States, and Canada, the only UN rapporteur in history, to be condemned by these countries. Western democracies do not condemn UN human rights experts. They side by them, they back them, but we got her condemned. France, Germany accused her of anti-Semitism repeatedly. Canada accused her of Holocaust distortion, quite rightly, should have been much more, but we got her condemned. She is outraged. She said, this is causing me reputational damage. She said, I just posted on my Twitter account, I despise the reputational damage that this caused me. Well, sorry, madam, if you're going to abuse a UN mandate to promote anti-Semitic tropes and to fuel anti-Semitism around the globe in the name of the United Nations, which was founded on the right principles of freedom, justice, human rights, we're going to land on you like a ton of bricks. So we got you condemned by 4 countries, and we're not going to stop. She was recently in Montreal. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and she was supposed to speak at my law school, McGill Law School. We were part of I joined the protests. Thankfully, the law school refused to let her go there. She had to go somewhere else on campus. Not good, but at least she wasn't at the law school. That was a big slap. And wherever she goes around the world, we're in her face. We published, I think it was a 60-page dossier. Please go on our website, unwatch.org. It details chapter after chapter, 5 or 6 pages of her anti-Semitic statements. So anyone, any of you, if your government, because we'll come to Australia in a moment, I'm sure you'll ask about that, but the current Australian government has been terrible. They have not condemned her. I named 4 countries. My country, Canada, condemned her. That's led by a center-left guy who's moved more to the left, Justin Trudeau, who's been a terrible disappointment, to put it mildly. So if the government is actually, Justin Trudeau is sort of center-left party, but he's in a party with NDP, which is a socialist party. So you're in a left socialist government in Canada. They can condemn her. Why can't Australia's government condemn her? It's a very good question that she should be pressed. So we have a huge dossier on our website, unwatch.org. You'll find it. Many of her statements on anti-Semitism, quoting the governments and other leading people who've condemned her, and the fact we exposed her corruption when she came to Australia. First of all, why did she go to Australia? She's the UN expert on Palestine. So, okay, she can go to the Palestinian territories. Israel's not going to let her go. Fine. So her predecessors would go to Jordan and they would ask Palestinians to come there and interview them there about their complaints. She can go to Jordan. She can go to Egypt. She can be in Geneva to investigate her mandate. What investigations is she doing in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Canberra? She went to New Zealand. She went all over. Why is she going thousands of miles away? She's going business class. That I did the math. It's going to cost about $20,000 to go from, she's based in Tunisia, where her husband works for the World Bank. Her husband, by the way, is a major anti-Semite as well. His name is Maxilo Kali. Read all about him in our report. Also a virulent anti-Semite. So she's flying from Tunisia business class to Australia. She's staying in nice hotels in all these different cities. It's costing a lot of money. We estimated $20,000. Also, she brought her assistant, Sarah Troyan, who illegally fundraises for her at an institute in Amsterdam. And we filed freedom of information requests and are beginning to get emails showing their illegal fundraising activities from her assistant. And when she went to Australia, the pro-Hamas groups, and I don't use that term lightly, one of the groups is called AFOPA, I think it's called Australian Friends of Palestine Association, something like that. And they, a few weeks ago, when Yahya Sinwar, the evil mastermind of October 7th, when he was killed, thankfully, they eulogized him. I'm going to say that again. The group that brought Albanese, Francesca Albanese, not your own, Francesca Albanese, no relation to your prime minister. When the group that brought this evil UN rapporteur to Australia, they openly praised Hamas. They eulogized Yahya Sinwar, quoting his legacy. They're the ones who brought her. And on their website, on their press releases, they said, we sponsored her trip. By the way, a UN expert's not allowed to take money from an outside group. They said, we sponsored her trip. And these other pro-Hamas groups with them said, yeah, they sponsored her trip to Australia, and we sponsored her trip to the different cities, to Melbourne and so forth. So they openly said, we sponsored her trip. So we filed a legal complaint to the UN. I got an email from the UN's investigations department of the Office of Oversight, of Independent Oversight, and they said, we've launched an investigation, gave me a case number. Between you and I don't think it's going to go anywhere because the UN is corrupt, but publicly they announced an investigation that put her on the defensive. So whether it's getting leading democracies to condemn her, which hurts her reputation, getting the UN to announce they open an investigation, getting her protested if she goes to McGill or other places. When she went to Barnard, we got major protests there. So we are trying to land on her like a ton of bricks, and we're not going to give up. Just yesterday, she was on Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan asked her, he said, I'm going to quote, there's this guy, there's someone, Hillel Neuer from UN Watch. He said, do you know who he is? She's like, who? He said, yeah, Hillel Neuer, executive director of UN Watch. He's criticized you for anti-Semitism. Who? What? Oh, he said, do you know who he is? Yeah, I think I may know who he is. So I just did a tweet. If you go on x.com on Twitter, I have a thread where I'm saying, little reminder, I'm the guy in March who, when you showed up at the UN to speak, took the floor and called out your anti-Semitism, quoting France, Germany, the US, and others. And the chair rebuked me in front of you as your face was twitching. I'm the one who called out your $20,000 junket trip to Australia, which had no justification. And I went on, little reminders as if she didn't know who I was. So that's Francesca Albanese. On Instagram, I gave her the Oscar for the worst performance on Piers Morgan, where she's just an actress pretending that she's not sure who I am. So that's Francesca Albanese. I mentioned briefly a few words about UNIFIL and UNRWA, and then I'll stop and take questions. UNIFIL, in a word, the UN interim force in Lebanon, initially created in 1978, when the PLO had taken over southern Lebanon and were firing rockets at Kiryat Shmona and other places in northern Israel. Israel went into Operation Litani to push them out. There was some kind of ceasefire, and they created UNIFIL, the interim force. But of course, sadly, when the PLO was finally kicked out of Lebanon, Iran, through Hezbollah, filled the void, and UNIFIL remained. In 2006, there was the Second Lebanon War. Israel pulled out, and the agreement was Resolution 1701, a very robust resolution saying that the UN will help the Lebanese army disarm Hezbollah. And on that basis, Israel pulled out. Okay, so UNIFIL, you had one job. Now the lights just went out, but can you still see me, or should I turn the lights back on?
It's adequate, Hillel. You can keep going, and when we have the break,
All
turn
right.
the lights on.
Okay, when you take a break, I'll turn the lights back on. It's I'm in an electricity a conscious room here in Jerusalem, so very nice. So UNIFIL, Israel pulled out in 2006. Okay, and the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 said, UNIFIL, your job now is to disarm Hezbollah. What happened since then? I mean, Hezbollah acquired 150,000 missiles. The entire southern Lebanon was turned into a armed fortress ready to invade Israel. Every home in southern Lebanon was basically just a military base. Underneath it were massive tunnels, just like in Gaza, and UNRWA didn't do a damn thing. Under thousands of, sorry, not UNRWA, UNIFIL didn't do a damn thing. And this is not just like troops from Fiji. Okay, there are some of those, but there are troops from Italy, troops from France, from Ireland, major countries, and they didn't do a damn thing. If anything, they probably were giving cover to Hezbollah. Really shameful. So as I wrote on Twitter, I said, UNIFIL, you had one job. You had one job, to disarm Hezbollah. And if anything, they did the opposite. They allowed Hezbollah to operate under their cover. The only time they speak out, if Israel attacks Hezbollah, then suddenly they complain. And if something comes close to them, because Hezbollah often attacks Israel near a UNIFIL base and so forth. So that was UNIFIL, complete failure. Now that there's a ceasefire, I can't imagine that Israel really is going to trust UNIFIL ever. I don't think that they trusted them, but they thought they could play some role. UNIFIL, complete failure. Frankly, in my opinion, should be closed. All they do in the end is when Israel has to fight back against Hezbollah, suddenly UNIFIL's like, no, we're here. We're not going anywhere, right? Israel told them to leave. And UNIFIL said, no, we're not going to go anywhere, right? Those for 18 years had zero backbone to stand up against Hezbollah, zero. Suddenly when Israel says, can you leave because we're trying to clear out Hezbollah? They're like, oh, no, we're not leaving. We will never leave. The Irish spokesman from UNIFIL, Ireland sadly turned into one of the most anti-Israel countries, certainly in all of Europe and in some cases beyond. We're not going to leave. We'll never leave that base because they're giving cover to Hezbollah. So that's UNIFIL. Finally, I want to talk about UNRWA, and then I'll wrap things up and open the floor to your questions. UNRWA, a word that's the UN agency for Palestinians. It was created with good intentions around 1949. After Israel's independence war, there were Palestinians who fled, some who were pushed out during the war, went to the neighboring areas. They went to Gaza. They went to Judea and Samaria, which Jordan conquered and called the West Bank. They went to Lebanon. They went to Syria. I think I've got most of the areas. Yeah. And then UNRWA was created, and the Americans were very involved in it. And the idea was altruistic. There were actually noble intentions, was to help these Arabs resettle where they were. Just like there were many wars happening, World War II and afterwards in Korea. Korea had something called UNRWA, okay, the UN agency for resettling Koreans. It existed for 2 or 3 years after the Korean War in 1950. It existed for a couple of years. They resettled millions of refugees. The UN agency was gone. All right, but UNRWA, something pathological happened, right? Keep in mind, good intentions. The Americans sent leading experts on resettlement to the region, and they realized the Arabs, okay, the Palestinian Arabs, refused to give up their war. Their war was to make sure there would be no Jewish state. They had declared jihad, and they didn't want any Jewish state anywhere. And if they were to say, okay, now I live in Gaza, I'm going to move on. Now I live in Lebanon, I'm going to lead a new life. I'm tens of miles from where I was living in northern Israel. I'm with people who speak my same language, Arabic, same religion, Islam, same culture. You could resettle in a second, okay? It'd be the equivalent. I'm Canadian. If I had to resettle in Northern America, it's a little, if I go to Vermont, it's a little different, but you resettle in 2 seconds, right? So the easiest circumstances to be resettled, they refused. And over time, it became the opposite of what it was meant to be. Instead of resettling them, it became to perpetuate them as permanent so-called refugees, right? Even in Jordan, where there are 2 million Palestinian Arabs, 2 million today, descended from those who came there after the 48 war, who have Jordanian citizenship. And the UN calls them refugees. I'm going to say that again. The Jordanian government gave them citizenship. They have passports. They're Jordanian citizens, and yet they're called refugees. As I've said on other occasions, my family fled anti-Semitism in Russia in 1904, and they fled to Canada. And we've been Canadian for 120 years. I today am not a Russian refugee. We've been Canadian for over a century. All right. But somehow, only at UNRWA, only for the Palestinians, someone who is a citizen has the oxymoronic term of being a citizen and a refugee. The only reason that anyone would call a Jordanian citizen a refugee who has to go back to Palestine is because that's the aim of UNRWA, which is to dismantle Israel. The point of UNRWA is to tell Palestinians, you're going to go back to Israel, and for them, going back is not buying a ticket on a plane and going to make Israel better and contribute. It's October 7th. Right? If you ask the Palestinians on October 7th who were committing the massacre, they will tell you, first of all, 90% are graduates of UNRWA, and they were exercising their right of return. This, for them, is return. It's return through massacre, killing, and destroying Israel. That's exactly what it means. We've been publishing the past week, every day, nearly every day, a video of UNRWA students saying openly, what do they teach you in UNRWA schools? Right of return, what does that mean? Yeah, October 7th, killing, jihad in the name of Allah. Do they teach you peace in your schools? On video, high density video, HD video. Do they teach you peace in your schools? No peace. No, what peace? No peace. Jihad. So that's what UNRWA is about. Our organization, UN Watch, for 9 years, since 2015, we've been producing very simple reports, nothing sophisticated, no hacking. We went on Facebook, we typed in UNRWA, and we found teachers. UNRWA employs thousands of teachers in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, because they have schools for hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs in these countries. And we wanted to know what they're being taught. Who are the teachers? And you click on their Facebook page, and there's a guy named Riyad Mansour. You just see it on Facebook. I'm a teacher at UNRWA. That's his description. And you see pictures of him in schools with his students. And then he's posting praising Hamas terrorist attacks. A terrorist attack 10 years ago where they came with axes in a synagogue and slaughtered Jews who were wearing their tefillin and their talit, praying in synagogue. They slaughtered them with axes. You could see blood on the floor. And Riyad Mansour, Riyad Nimr, his name is Riyad Nimr, N-I-M-R. He was posting the gruesome pictures and praising it. Systematic pictures of Adolf Hitler saying he should have finished the job. Pictures of Hamas leaders every day. And we were producing these screenshots, right? Nothing sophisticated, no hacking, going on Facebook, open to the world, publishing these reports and circulating it, sending it to UNRWA, sending it to the heads of the UN, sending it to our countries who pay for UNRWA, right? Your country, Australia, pays for UNRWA. I don't know if the figure is 20 or 30 million a year, something in that area, maybe a bit more. My country, Canada, is giving about 30 million a year. America was giving well over 300 million a year. Germany, all the Western countries are funding UNRWA. I sent it to them. We talked about it nonstop at the UN. They know exactly what's going on. This came to a head in January of this year when UNRWA, when Israel presented UNRWA with evidence that a dozen UNRWA staffers, current employees, were involved in the massacre. One of them was the UNRWA social worker who dragged the lifeless body of 21-year-old Yonatan Samarano, who was killed in the Nova Music Festival. An UNRWA social worker seen on video dragging his lifeless body into an SUV and kidnapping him into Gaza. An UNRWA social worker. So this created a storm. The UNRWA said, "Oh my gosh, we're horrified, we're shocked." Horrified and shocked? I wonder about that. They said, okay, we're firing these 12 people. And then America announced that they were freezing funding, and about 15 countries said they would do the same, and including Australia, but it was really insincere and disingenuous. The moment they announced the freezing of funds, they already tried to figure out how to climb down the ladder, and they created a fake inquiry. It was called the Colonna Review, headed by Catherine Colonna, the former foreign minister of France. She was heading the review. That itself indicated it would be a sham because a month prior, she said, UNRWA is needed more than ever. She did a tweet to the head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini. So she was completely not objective. She sat on the board of UNRWA. Her government was a major donor to UNRWA. If she's investigating their wrongdoing, she would be implicating herself. Complete sham that she was on it. 3 NGOs from Scandinavia, a Scandinavian institute. What could be more pure, more noble, more objective than Scandinavian institutes? Except if you look at them, each one is more anti-Israel than the next. One group called CMI, another group obscenely called Raoul Wallenberg Institute. Raoul Wallenberg, the heroic Swedish citizen who saved Jews, tens of thousands of Jews during the Holocaust in Budapest, and another group whose name escapes me at the moment. So there were 3 groups, and each of these groups are anti-Israel, very well-known pro-UNRWA lobby groups. One of their lobbyists is Kirsty Berg. She's their expert on UNRWA. She worked for UNRWA. She's a pro-UNRWA lobbyist. She was on the inquiry to investigate UNRWA wrongdoing. So naturally, in April, 2 months later, the Catherine Colonna Review said, guess what? Yes, there are problems, there are some problems, but UNRWA is more robust than any other international organization in the world. It's indispensable, irreplaceable, lifeline, life-saving, indispensable. The mantra that UNRWA has been putting out, the talking points for decades, that was her conclusion. Completely worthless. And then on cue, all of our governments, Germany, Japan, all the rest, reinstated funding. And Canada, actually, under Justin Trudeau, even reinstated funding before the fake review came out. So that was the review process. That's kind of where we are now. A few things about what we exposed. Here's the truth about UNRWA, horrified. When it was revealed in February that underneath UNRWA headquarters, there was a terror tunnel. Underneath UNRWA headquarters in Gaza, a major terror tunnel with computer servers, not a laptop, not a computer, huge computer servers, which were Hamas espionage servers spying probably on Palestinians to keep them in check, probably on their social media, what have you. And the electric grid, there's an electric cable going directly from the computer server up into the UNRWA headquarters. That came out. UNRWA's Philippe Lazzarini said, and I quote, UNRWA did not know what is underneath its headquarters. I'm going to say that again. You can see it on Twitter. UNRWA did not know what is underneath its headquarters. I'm not making that up. The only problem is, right? How could he know, right? Digging tunnels for years, massive tunnels, who would know? The only problem is a few days prior, the Wall Street Journal had published a report saying that in 2014, many UNRWA employees at the UNRWA headquarters noticed that the parking lot was sinking. The parking lot in the UNRWA compound was sinking. And according to the Wall Street Journal, everyone knew what was going on and no one said anything. They were silent because they were afraid, because Hamas is running a fascist, oppressive, totalitarian mafia state. So they knew it was good for them and everyone was silent, but everyone knew. So he's like, we had no idea. Everyone at UNRWA knew. They knew the parking lot was sinking, terror tunnels underneath. Second, we didn't know that our people support terrorism. We had no idea, right? Put aside the fact that for 10 years, we sent them hundreds and hundreds of pages of their teachers supporting terrorism. Earlier this year, we wrote to UNRWA and said, the head of your teachers union, I'm going to say that again, the head of the UNRWA teachers union in Lebanon, Fathi al-Sharif, principal of a major school called the Deir Yassin School in Tyre, Lebanon, is a major Hamas figure. He's promoting Hamas every day on his page. He has family celebrations where those in the front row are terrorist leaders routinely. You need to fire him. We sent all of this in June to Lazzarini. And he said, oh, well, we don't know. We had suspended him, but we don't really know. And in September, Fathi al-Sharif got a missile into his apartment, his second floor apartment, targeted missile by the IDF. He was eliminated. Why did the IDF eliminate him? Well, the same day he was eliminated, Hamas announced, you killed our leader. Hamas announced that Fathi al-Sharif, the head of the UNRWA Teachers Union in Lebanon, was the head of Hamas in Lebanon. And they released pictures that we didn't even have. pictures of him with Haniyeh, pictures of him with guns, pictures of him dressed in Hamas uniform. And they said, we praise our leader in Lebanon for giving jihadi education. So I could go on. I'll just mention another example. The head of the UNRWA Teachers Union in Gaza was Su'ail al-Hindi, a member of the Hamas Politburo. Okay. Again, when it was emerged, UNRWA said, we didn't know. And they know. And sadly, your government knows. And when this came up in the Senate around February or March in the Australian Senate, a leading civil servant was confronted because we had exposed thousands of UNRWA teachers on a chat group, a Telegram chat group, in live time, praising the Hamas massacre of October 7th as it happened. They were praising it on the chat group. We found the chat group, we exposed it. It went viral around the world. And a senator asked the senior civil servant from your foreign ministry, I have his name somewhere, but not with me. And he said, oh no, that report is not credible. They used a picture that wasn't the right picture. Just lying through his teeth. You know, your foreign ministry, like every other foreign ministry, Canada, Switzerland, US, has never contacted me for information. We're the leading group exposing what their money is going for. So this is what we're up against, but we're not giving up. We're holding them to account. We have major investigations going on in Albanese, more exposés coming out. On UNRWA, the Swiss parliament decided, I spoke there in April, you know, I normally on Pesach, on Passover, I do not work. It's an important Jewish holiday. But on the last day of Pesach, I was invited to the Swiss parliament, and I went there and I spent the last part of the holiday there to appear in the Swiss parliament because they had a debate about defunding UNRWA, and I went and I told them the truth in a closed session in Bern. And then this was in April, and in September 14th, I believe, the Swiss parliament lower house voted 99 to 88 to immediately suspend funding for UNRWA, which is amazing. It's now gone to the Swiss Senate. The Swiss Senate committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, just had a vote on Thursday, and they voted 12 to 0, one abstention, to invite UN Watch again to testify before they make a final decision. So we're holding them to account. The new US administration, I can promise you, is going to make permanent the defunding of UNRWA. Right now, the Biden administration, a law was passed, 1 year freeze, but when the new administration comes in, you can be sure they're going to maintain US defunding of UNRWA, and hopefully we can work with them to do much more than that, which is to take down an organization that does nothing but promote terrorism. So to wrap up, our organization, UN Watch, is not going to give up holding to account the United Nations, whose ideals are noble, but which has been hijacked by dictatorships and their apologists to be used for terrorism. We're never going to give up. And I'm speaking to you from Israel, and I can tell you with faith that Israel will prevail. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Hillel, so much. We'll just have a very quick break, enable you to turn on the lights properly. And as we always do, I'd like to ask everyone, and we have many new people on this event online. At the end of the event, we need your ongoing support. Make sure you go to the AJA website, jewishassociation.org.au. If you have not yet signed up to our email list, you can do that. You can become a member. And we still have, as Tennille alluded to at the beginning, we still have our charity page open. If you're a latecomer and haven't yet made a donation, there's the link, charity with the letter d.com/AJAT. AJA tzedakah is tax deductible. Next week, we'll be talking about the Arab grab of Jewish land in Yehuda and Shomron, with some people from Regavim, and also an ex-Aussie who I know, Mark Schneider, will be looking at a particular case study. And finally, we do have an important live event coming up in Sydney. The chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, one of the great think tanks, is coming to Australia for a conference in Brisbane, is transiting Sydney. We will have that person for a private live event run by AJA. It is a ticketed event. The link is in our email and on our Facebook page. So those that are interested, it's an opportunity to see one of the great Jewish thinkers who heads an important institute live in Sydney. And finally, I just want to show the benefit of our guest this particular article. On a much smaller scale, it is AJA which has led calling out UNRWA and other US agencies. This article was written 5 or 6 years ago, which exposed some of the links between the UNRWA services and terrorism. The previous government was receptive, and we succeeded in getting Australia's funding to UNRWA reduced, not eliminated, but reduced. We would have liked it reduced to zero. It hit a low of $10 million as a result of our efforts, but unfortunately the current government has turned that around and more, and has contributed a lot of extra money to UNRWA, probably around $40 million now. So Tennille, over to you.
Thank you. I've popped that link for the Dr. Yaron Brook event in the chat. Tickets are limited, so please book ahead of time. Before we launch into questions, I'd like to thank Greg Rosshandler, one of our great supporters of AJA, for making tonight's guest possible, and thank you very much to Greg. All right, questions. We don't have much time, so I don't think we'll get through everybody, but we will start with Charlotte. Please unmute.
Thank you so much, and what an honour to hear, Hillel. My question just basically refers to the use of the term occupied territories, especially with the UN, and it's Israel is the only country that is ever referred to as an occupied territory in terms of the Palestinian cause and argument. And if you look throughout history, especially, you know, parts of Eastern Europe that belong to one country, the other, and whatever, when a country has won a war, and in our particular case with Israel, they have been successful in wars that they did not start or provoke, those territories that are now conquered or resumed or whatever are never ever referred to as occupied.
Okay.
And I just want Hillel's comment on that.
Yeah, you're quite right. It's one of the many double standards and injustices of the UN. Indeed, you will never hear language about Morocco in Western Sahara or Turkey occupying Northern Cyprus, and the list goes on. And the fact Turkey is also occupying parts of northern Syria, you just never hear it at all. And so it was actually part of the dehumanization. Say that word again, it's an important word. Not just delegitimization, not just demonization, but dehumanization. The reason today that so many young people are ready to join mobs in front of synagogues, which you're facing and we're all facing around the world, and even some people to hunt Jews in Amsterdam and so forth, is because Israelis and Jews have been dehumanized. And they did that through many ways. Most recently, the false accusation of genocide. Before that, for about 3, 4, 5 years, was apartheid. These are language to call someone evil, you know, genocide, apartheid. But for decades, it was something that didn't sound evil, but it was really, that was the motivation, was the occupation, as you mentioned, because the Nazis were the occupiers, right? Nazi occupiers, those fighting were the resistance. So that term used always occupied, of Jews being in their ancient homeland, Jews being in Hebron, where which we read in the Torah quite recently in synagogue, how Abraham paid 400 shekels of silver to buy the land of Hebron. That's an occupier. That's like the French from France occupying, New Caledonia, or, pick your example of some European power that's tens of thousands of, kilometers away. Jews in Judea and Samaria are occupied. So it's absurd, but it was used for decades in a subversive way to dehumanize the Israelis. They're not humans, they're occupiers, settlers, apartheid, genocide.
Thank you. Alan, please unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hillel, is it accurate to say that if it ever happens, from the day after UNRWA is dismantled and the school curriculums get changed, that it will still take a generation or two for people to emerge in leadership positions who will view the Arab relationship with Israel in a different light? Can you see this realistically happening? And then what does this mean for the next 30 or 40 years?
Look, because of our work, indeed, because of our work regularly seeing what is taught in schools, and we commissioned interviews of students, and we're putting them out once a day this week. It's quite dispiriting. At the end of the day, education is everything. It's everything. And if they're being educated for hatred and anti-Semitism and terrorism and war, what can we hope for? So it's quite dispiriting. The only thing I can point to on the other side is the Abraham Accords, which is, it's not Gaza, but it's in the Middle East, where you have Arab countries that have embraced normalization. It's not perfect. Tragically, we saw that a wonderful person, an innocent rabbi in Dubai, was murdered apparently by the Iranian regime, assassins that were sent by the Iranian regime. But it's notable that despite the war, we might have expected that with a war with millions of people around the world hating on Israel, that it would be obvious for Arab governments to say we're canceling our peace accords, but they did not. So that's, I think, extremely significant. And the normalization and the future-looking attitude of the Emirates and Bahrain, to some extent Morocco, to some extent, points to what could be. And we just have to hope that first you have to defeat evil, right? The Nazism was defeated because the Nazis were defeated, right? Everyone saw, the Germans understood they lost. And so, one of the criticisms of the ceasefire, and it's far above my pay grade to judge whether Israel should have signed or not, but you need the other side to see that they're defeated. And the problem is that the whole world, especially the UN, keeps telling Hamas and the others, we're with you. Francesca Albanese saying you have the right to resist. So we just have to work hard to encourage the peace accords. Israel has to be strong so that the terrorists know that they lost, and the people for Gaza for a generation have to look at the ruins and say, this is what happened. This is what nihilistic hatred, anti-Semitism, and terrorism brought us. And actually, there could be another way. There could be another way. And Gaza could be a paradise. I was there decades ago. Beautiful white sands, just downstream from Tel Aviv. And let's hope that there will be a new generation that will embrace peace.
Let's hope that. Hugh, please unmute.
Hello, Hillel. We met at a think conference last year in March, and I filmed an interview with you then. I've got a question which relates to the possible parting of the company between Israel and the UN, either by Israel resigning from the UN, or even by the UN deciding to expel Israel. My question is, how do you think this would affect Israel if this actually happened?
I don't think the UN is going to expel Israel. I think we'll see noise about it, but at the end of the day, the United States is not going to allow it, and even the Arab countries who hate Israel, they kind of like to have the punching bag. So I don't think it's going to happen, but we will see noise about it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Thank you. Richard, please unmute.
Hi, Hillel. Thank you very much for that talk. My question, and I think you've alluded to it in your discussion, is these Western countries have very strict anti-terrorism financing laws. I mean, you've exposed the links between Hamas and UNRWA. So how do they get round? What's the justification for providing funds effectively, which will land up in terrorists' hands?
Good question. Look, I invite everyone to go on our website, unwatch.org, under the UNRWA section, and you'll see we have a page that details the various legal actions that have been launched in the United States, Canada, France, and maybe some other jurisdictions against UNRWA, including invoking the issues that you cited about financing terrorism and using our materials. So legal actions have been filed. The biggest obstacle is immunity. UNRWA, basically as a UN agency, has immunity from legal process, and that's what they're invoking. And to be honest, it seems like they'll get away with it. So sadly, UN bodies are immune from legal actions, and it's not clear how to surmount that. In the United States, there's a special case where there are entities that are not the UN, but that fundraise for UNRWA, which is there's sort of like I think it's called UNRWA USA, which is a nonprofit organization. It's not a UN organization. They raise millions of dollars for UNRWA, and they can be sued. So there are ways, and I invite anyone who's an activist to do two things. One is to figure out if there's legal actions that can be taken, not obvious. The other thing is freedom of information. Something amazing that any of you can do is to file freedom of information requests. If you ask freedom of information requests and file them in Australia, asking them what did they know about UNRWA complicity with Hamas and terrorism, you will find that that if some of the emails get released, internal emails from the Australian government, the Foreign Ministry, you'll find a lot of damning things on that. So that would be interesting. It's not a lawsuit, but you could actually expose and shame them.
Okay, yeah, because I guess my question was mainly aimed at the governments themselves. I mean, they're the people who are providing the funding, so they should know that where the funding is going to end up, and they've got laws that they're meant to abide by as well, presumably.
You should sue your government.
Oh,
Sorry, you've just gone on mute for a second. Hello?
Hillel, you've gone mute. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're back with us.
Yeah. A French lawyer filed a case basically taking legal action against the French government for funding terrorism in violation of their laws. And I think that's a great model. So I invite people in Australia, hire a good lawyer. And as you said, a citizen in Australia can sue their government or send kind of letters if it's not an actual lawsuit. So that is something worth pursuing. Unfortunately, we're small and we can't do all these things, but we can provide the information. So if there's a lawyer in Australia who decides to take some kind of legal or administrative action for their government, knowingly funding an agency that is infested with terrorists, we'll be happy to provide you with the evidence.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this evening. As our final question, Hillel, how can we support the work you are doing? How can we follow your journey? How can we be more active? What can we do to help you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Look, the first thing, of course, is to be informed. So I told you about a number of things. Some of it you knew, some of the details you didn't know. The best way to stay informed is just to sign up. We have a newsletter. It goes out once every 2 weeks, maybe. It's not intrusive at all. So if you sign up at unwatch.org with your email, you'll know if we have a campaign, if we have a new report, if we have a petition going on, and you can run with it. The gentleman that just asked a very good question, it's a great question, is how can you pursue your own government? So I'm not going to talk about Australia specifically because I'm dealing with the world, but I'm going to put out the information. You're going to know that your government is funding it. You're going to know that your government was silent because your government never condemned Francesca Albanese. And then you should, as we say in America, take the ball and run with it. You should be asking your MPs, your foreign minister, your senators, why isn't our country condemned Francesca Albanese? France did, Germany did, America did, the left-wing government in Canada did. Why are we silent? Why are we sending money to UNRWA when you have hundreds of pages of how their senior officials are Hamas terrorists? And maybe someone can do legal action. So really the main thing I'd say is to get informed, sign up on our website, unwatch.org. I think that's the best start. Obviously, we're also on social media, share our materials. Myself, Hillel Neuer, UN Watch. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're also on Facebook, although Facebook is not so friendly to us. Our main thing is Twitter and Instagram, but we are also on Facebook.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure to have you. It's been such a privilege to be able to listen to you and have this exclusive time with you. Thank you again to Greg Rosshandler, and thank you again to Hillel. It is really meaningful. You can see we've had an incredible participation rate tonight. I'll let you know that with the people we have on our live here on Zoom, we are also live on Facebook. This is also recorded and will go onto our YouTube channel, where we do receive significant views as well. And this will be replayed on J Air Radio tomorrow morning. So thank you everybody for tuning in tonight, joining us, and the biggest, warmest thank you to Hillel Neuer,